Your worst engineer just got promoted to manage your best one. That is not a joke, and it is not an accident. There is a name for exactly why it happened, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it in your own company. Scott Adams, the guy who drew Dilbert, spent years inside corporate cubicles before he ever drew a comic strip about them, and what he noticed was too sharp to leave as satire. Most people know the Peter Principle, the old idea that people get promoted based on how well they do their current job, right up until they land in a role that is one step past their actual competence, and then they stall there forever. Mediocre, stuck, promoted into their own ceiling. It is a clean idea. It is also, according to Adams, too generous. He proposed something meaner, and he called it the Dilbert Principle. The claim is blunt. Companies do not promote their most competent people into management. They promote the least competent ones. On purpose, structurally, over and over, without ever writing it down as a policy. Notice what's actually different between the two ideas, because it matters. The Peter Principle is almost forgiving. It says people rise because they were genuinely good at the job below the one they just landed in, and the system simply ran out of runway one level too late. Nobody did anything wrong on purpose. It's an honest mistake repeated at scale. The Dilbert Principle has no such innocence to it. It says the promotion wasn't a miscalculation about someone's ceiling, it was a deliberate, if unspoken, decision to move a person who was already failing, specifically because they were failing, and specifically because failing quietly in a management seat costs the company less than failing loudly at the actual work. One is a system that occasionally overshoots. The other is a system that uses management as a pressure valve. Here is the logic underneath it, and it is uncomfortably rational once you walk through it. Incompetent employees cause less damage when they are giving orders than when they are doing the actual work. Think about what that means in practice. A brilliant engineer sitting at a keyboard writing code is one of the most valuable things a company owns. Every hour of that person's output compounds clean architecture, fewer bugs, systems that hold up under pressure. A terrible engineer sitting at that same keyboard is the opposite. Every hour of output is a liability, bugs that a junior teammate has to clean up later, fragile systems, technical debt with somebody else's name quietly attached to it. So what does a company do with a person who is bad at the hands-on work but still needs a job title, a seat, a next step? It moves them to where the real work happens somewhere else. It gives them a team to manage. Suddenly, the terrible engineer is no longer writing bad code, they are approving other people's good code, sitting in meetings, forwarding emails, setting priorities. The damage doesn't disappear. It just becomes harder to trace back to a single line of broken output. And this is not an engineering-only phenomenon, even though Adams drew it from a software office. Swap the keyboard for a phone in a sales department, and the same math holds. A sales rep who consistently misses their number is a direct, visible drag on revenue every quarter in a report someone above them actually reads. Move that same underperforming rep into a sales manager role, and the failure gets diffused across an entire team's quota instead of sitting on one person's line item. It's harder to point at. It takes longer to notice. The company hasn't fixed anything, it has just relocated the evidence. The same logic shows up in customer support, in finance, in operations. Anywhere a person's individual output is easy to measure and their managerial output is not. The common thread isn't the industry. It's that management, almost everywhere, is one of the few jobs in a company where poor performance is genuinely hard to attribute to a single decision, a single output, a single number on a dashboard. That opacity is exactly what makes it a convenient place to park someone you don't want to fire and don't know what else to do with. Adams didn't just float this as a punchline for a comic strip. He surveyed thousands of his own readers for his 1,996 book, and the pattern was not a rare anecdote. It showed up constantly, across companies, across industries. Weak performers were getting management titles as a face-saving exit ramp from technical roles they were struggling in. It let the company avoid firing someone, avoid an awkward performance conversation, avoid admitting a hiring mistake. Instead, a promotion. New title, new office, new line on the org chart, and everyone gets to pretend it was a reward instead of a removal. Meanwhile, and this is the part that should actually worry you if you run a team, the strongest technical talent stayed technical. Some of them never advanced at all. Not because they lacked ambition, because the only ladder in the building led away from the work they were best at, and they either climbed it reluctantly or refused to climb it, and got quietly passed over for people who were worse at the job but more willing to leave it. Picture this playing out at a mid-sized company with a technical department that actually matters to the business. There's an engineer called the type, not the individual who has been struggling for a good while now. Missed deadlines, code that needs constant rework, a manager who has had the same difficult conversation about output more than once already. Firing them creates paperwork, morale risk, maybe even legal exposure, depending on how the last performance review was worded. But there's an opening on the team lead track. The engineer gets moved into it. Nobody frames it as a demotion in disguise, because, on paper, it is a promotion, more money, more authority, a better title on LinkedIn. Now that same struggling employee sits in every planning meeting, assigns work to people who were, quietly, better at the actual job than they ever were. Every technical call this new manager makes is a slightly worse call than the person they're overseeing would have made. And the person overseeing it all, someone above them, sees a tidy org chart and assumes the system worked as intended. There's an old, blunter phrase for this move that predates Adams by decades: getting kicked upstairs. It's the same instinct dressed up in older language. Take someone who isn't working out where they are and hand them a grander-sounding title somewhere they can do less visible damage. It shows up in family businesses, moving a struggling relative into a vague strategy role, in politics, moving an inconvenient figure into a ceremonial position, and in ordinary companies, moving a struggling contributor into management. The label changes. The mechanism doesn't. What Adams did was notice that this old, half-joking move had quietly become the default operating procedure for entire technical departments, not an occasional awkward exception. This creates a strange, quiet kind of organizational rot, and it's quiet precisely because nothing about it looks broken from a distance. Teams end up led by people who do not actually understand the work they are managing. Not because they're lazy or malicious, because understanding the work was never the reason they got the job. Decisions inside that team increasingly get made on politics instead of competence, because when a manager can't evaluate a technical trade-off on its merits, they default to whoever argues loudest, whoever they trust personally, whoever reminds them of themselves. Sit in on one of that team's planning meetings and you can see it happen in real time. A technical debate comes up which approach to take, which trade-off is worth the risk, and instead of the strongest argument winning, the manager reaches for whichever position feels safest to defend upward, or whichever teammate they personally trust, because they don't have the depth to actually judge the two options on their engineering merits. Over enough meetings, that pattern trains the whole team. The people with the best technical instincts learn that winning the argument on the facts doesn't matter as much as winning it politically, and the ones who are good at reading a room start out-competing the ones who are good at the actual work. And your best individual contributors, the ones actually keeping the technical output solid, watch someone who was, by any honest measure, worse at the job than they are, get the title and the raise. That is a specific, corrosive kind of demoralization. It is not, I didn't get promoted. It is, I watched the wrong person get promoted, and I understand exactly why it happened, and it had nothing to do with skill. And once a talented individual contributor reaches that conclusion, the relationship they have with the company changes permanently, even if they say nothing about it out loud. They stop assuming the ladder is meritocratic. They start treating every future promotion announcement as a data point about what actually gets rewarded, not what leadership claims gets rewarded. That quiet recalibration is far more dangerous to a company than one bad manager, because it spreads. It doesn't stay contained to the person who has passed over, it becomes the story that gets told at lunch, in the group chat, to the recruiter who calls later with a better offer. Now here's the part that most companies never see coming, because it doesn't show up on any single quarter's numbers, it shows up years later, and by then it looks like an unrelated problem. The real cost of the Dilbert Principle is not the bad manager. Bad managers are visible, people complain about them, HR gets involved eventually, sometimes they get replaced. The real cost is what it does to the people who didn't get moved into management, your best technical performers. the ones who watched the incentive structure and understood it perfectly. They learn, correctly, that being excellent at the actual work is not the path to more money, more status, or more influence in the company. Being willing to stop doing the work is. And your sharpest people are usually the ones paying the closest attention to incentives, because that's part of what makes them sharp. So you don't just get a mediocre manager, you get a slow bleed of your best technical talent, either checking out, coasting at the level where they're safe, or leaving entirely for a company that will actually pay them to stay excellent at what they're good at. The Dilbert Principle doesn't just misallocate one bad promotion, it teaches your entire technical bench what the company actually rewards, and it is almost never the thing leadership says it rewards in the all-hands meeting. So what do you actually do with this? If you're the one building the promotion path instead of just living inside someone else's version of it, the fix starts with refusing to let two completely different questions collapse into one decision. Question 1. Is this person good at their current job? Question 2. Is this person good at leading other people? Those are not the same skill, and they are not even correlated in the way most org charts pretend they are. Technical excellence and people leadership draw on different muscles entirely. One is about depth in a craft, the other is about judgment, communication, and the ability to make other people better at their jobs. Some people are strong at both. Plenty are strong at exactly one. Conflating those two questions into a single promotion ladder produces exactly the two failure modes we just walked through. Either you promote incompetence into power, handing management authority to someone because they were struggling at the work, not because they were good at leading, or you drive out your best technical people, because management is presented as the only path up and staying technical starts to look like a dead end even for someone who has no interest in managing anyone. The structural fix that solves this is not new. And it doesn't require reinventing your org chart from scratch. It requires building a real technical track that runs parallel to the management track, with genuinely equal pay and genuinely equal status. Not a consolation prize title that everyone quietly understands is second tier. A principal engineer, a staff-level specialist, a senior architect, whatever you call it, needs to be able to earn the same compensation, the same seat in strategic conversations, and the same respect as someone managing a team of the same size. If that track exists only on paper, with a ceiling that's obviously lower than the management ladder, your best people will see through it fast, and you're back to square one. The point isn't to stop promoting people into management. It's to stop using management as a landing pad for people who couldn't hack the actual job, and to stop treating doesn't want to manage as synonymous with doesn't want to grow. There's a second, less comfortable half of the fix, and it's the part most companies skip because it requires an actual conversation instead of an org chart tweak. When someone is struggling in their current role, the honest response is a direct performance conversation about that role, clear feedback, a real plan to improve, or, if it truly isn't working, an actual exit. A promotion is never a substitute for that conversation. It might feel kinder in the moment, because nobody has to say the hard thing out loud, but it isn't kinder. It just moves the hard thing downstream onto a team that now has to be managed by someone who was never equipped to manage them, and it moves it without ever fixing the original problem. If you catch yourself reaching for a management title to solve what is actually a performance problem, that's the exact moment to stop and ask which question you're really answering. In practice, telling the two questions apart is less mysterious than it sounds. Leadership ability tends to show up before the title does, if you actually look for it. Does this person, given informal authority on a small project, make the people around them better? Or does the project just run through them without lifting anyone else up? Do junior teammates already seek them out for guidance, unprompted, or does that only start happening after the promotion is announced? Have they ever expressed genuine interest in coaching and coordinating other people? Or has management only entered the conversation as a way to keep them from leaving after a rough review cycle? None of these questions require a formal assessment center or an expensive consultant. They require a manager willing to watch for the signal before defaulting to the promotion, instead of using the promotion as a substitute for watching. Here's the honest, slightly uncomfortable part worth sitting with. Most companies don't do this on purpose, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. Nobody sits in a room and decides to promote incompetence. It happens because promoting the struggling engineer is the path of least resistance in the moment, and nobody adds up the compounding cost until years later when the technical bench has quietly hollowed out. If you're not deliberately separating good at the job from good at leading, you are not actually choosing your leaders. You are just moving your weakest performers to wherever they can do the least visible harm and calling it a promotion. Your best people notice the difference immediately, even when nobody says it out loud. Go back to where we started. Your worst engineer getting promoted to manage your best one isn't a fluke of one bad hiring decision. It's what happens by default, quietly, every time a company treats management as a landing pad instead of a distinct skill with its own bar to clear. The fix isn't complicated to describe, even if it's uncomfortable to practice. Ask whether someone is good at leading before you ask whether it's convenient to move them. Build a technical path that actually pays and actually matters, so staying technical is never a consolation prize, and have the direct performance conversation instead of dressing it up as a promotion. Do that consistently, and you stop quietly training your best people to leave, and you stop putting your worst decisions in charge of your best work. Follow along for more ideas like this one.